It was the summer of 2005, and I thought I had everything I needed to be happy. My name is John, and my wife, whom I'll call Lily, was the love of my life. We had gotten married that January in a simple but meaningful ceremony. We had just moved into an old bungalow nestled on 3 acres of land. It was the perfect place to start our life together. We adopted a dog from a local shelter, a small puppy that brought even more joy to our routine. That July evening, the sky was clear and filled with fireflies. Lily and I were sitting on the porch, each holding a cold beer. Our dog Max was playing with a pair of socks I had knotted up for him. Everything felt peaceful, as it should. I asked Lily if she minded me checking my email before bed. I was waiting on a response from the community college where I was set to start teaching in the fall. Lily just smiled and said she was heading to bed. I went inside, turned on the computer, and opened my inbox. There was nothing new from my boss, but an email from an unusual address caught my attention. It was from someone named Reagan, and the subject line was cryptic. EBOV7, preliminary results. At first I thought it was spam, but for some reason I opened it. The email's content was nothing short of intriguing. It was clearly meant for someone else, a person named Mark. Attached was a file titled E7X Results and Suggestions, and the email discussed preliminary tests, genetic modifications, and what seemed like classified information. The sender emphasized that the details were for the recipient's eyes only, warning not to print or share anything. I remember hesitating, my cursor hovering over the attachment link. Part of me knew I should ignore it, delete the email, and act like it never existed. But another part, curious, maybe reckless, decided to open the file. What I found inside changed my life forever. The attachment contained a series of technical documents, graphs, and photographs that appeared to come from a high-security research lab. At the time, I could barely comprehend what I was looking at. Many of the terms were too scientific for me, but a few words stood out. Genetic modification, altered behavior, and Project OV7. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes, trying to process what I had just read. The email mentioned an experiment involving animals, or at least that's what I assumed. But there was something about the photos that unsettled me. They depicted creatures that seemed to blur the line between natural and unnatural, as if someone had played God. Staring at those disturbing images, I began to question, why had I received this email? Who was Mark? And more importantly, who was Reagan, the sender? I decided to dig into the email's history and found a long thread between the two, filled with technical jargon and codes. Suddenly, a wave of fear hit me. What if this email had been sent to me by mistake? What if someone was watching me right now? My heart raced, but I couldn't just ignore what I'd seen. I took screenshots of the most relevant pages and saved a copy of the file onto my flash drive. It was an impulsive decision, but something inside me told me I needed to learn more about it. The next day, while Lily was at the market, I decided to investigate further. I typed Project OV7 into every search engine I could think of, but found absolutely nothing. It was as if the information had been wiped from the internet. I started to realize I might be dealing with something bigger than I'd ever imagined. When Lily returned, she noticed I was on edge. She asked what was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her. How could I explain that I had stumbled upon a secret that might be dangerous? So, I lied and said I was just stressed about my new position at the college. She smiled, hugged me, and told me everything would be fine. That night, while Lily slept, I stayed up, poring over those documents again. I didn't know what to do with the information or how it would affect my life. But one thing was certain. I had opened a door to something far bigger than myself, and now there was no turning back. That night was one of the longest of my life. I eventually drifted off into a restless sleep, but my dreams were anything but peaceful. I found myself in a dark corridor lit only by a flickering overhead light. The place felt like an abandoned lab, with metallic doors and broken glass scattered across the floor. As I walked, I could feel the cold floor beneath my bare feet. The air was heavy, almost suffocating. I heard a strange noise, a mix of scratching and something metallic being dragged. My heart pounded, but for some reason I kept moving. Then, a shadow darted across the hallway in front of me. It wasn't human. It was tall, slender, and moved unnervingly fast. I tried to run, but it felt like my feet were glued to the ground. The shadow returned, now closer, and I finally saw its eyes, bright and unblinking as if piercing right through me. The creature lunged, and everything went black. I woke up gasping for air, sweat dripping down my face. Sitting up in bed, I tried to steady my breathing. Glancing over, I saw Lily sleeping soundly. Not wanting to wake her, I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. But as I walked, something made me stop. The front door was slightly ajar. Frozen, I strained to hear any sound. Nothing. Taking a deep breath, I moved cautiously toward the door. When I opened it fully, I froze. On the ground were muddy footprints, but they weren't human. They were larger, oddly shaped, almost like deformed animal paws. I quickly shut and locked the door, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. After all, who or what could have gotten in without me or Lily noticing? But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching us. It was an ordinary night when I received that email. The sender was from an unknown company, but the content, it was something I never imagined seeing in my inbox. They were talking about manufacturing a biological weapon using the Ebola virus. No, this wasn't a joke. The message was technical, precise, and felt like a veiled threat disguised as a proposal. I should have ignored it, moved on with my life, and left it behind. But something gnawed at me. How did a company like this find me? I didn't even know what they were about. I'd only heard vague rumors about biological weapons in global security discussions. That night, I slept restlessly, haunted by what it might mean. The next day, 2 men in dark suits showed up at my workplace. They didn't mention the email, but their gaze, something was off. What did they want? Was it just a coincidence? Or was everything connected? A creeping sensation of being watched began to grow inside me, a tension I couldn't shake. Later that evening, exhausted and hungry, I took my wife, Emma, and our little dog, Max, to her parents' house. Her father, Peter, was grilling something simple, as he often did when he wanted to relax. But this wasn't just a casual dinner, not after what we'd been through. The tractor had exploded. It seemed impossible, yet it happened. The sound still echoed in my head. I went to the field where the explosion occurred and saw a circle of scorched earth and burnt grass, as if the ground itself bore the mark of something otherworldly. That night, as I returned home, nothing made sense. My mind raced, replaying every detail of what could have gone wrong. The tractor had no visible issues, but deep down, I felt something wasn't right. That explosion was no accident. I had the unsettling sense that someone was trying to send a message to catch us off guard. Fear began to take hold, and what terrified me most was that I didn't know who to trust. After that harrowing night, paranoia consumed me. Every little change, every detail that might have gone unnoticed before, now seemed like a clue to something much larger. My guns, for instance, had always been a constant in my life. I cleaned them every Sunday, treated them with the respect of any vital tool. But during my weekly check, I noticed something strange. My shooting pens were gone. Let me repeat, my shooting pens, which I meticulously maintained, were missing. None of the other firearms had been touched, but their absence chilled me to the bone. What was happening? Who was behind this? These weren't mere coincidences or mistakes. Someone was watching, manipulating things to leave me vulnerable. I went to the basement where I kept a highly secret weapon, the mayor's leg, and the dust on it was undisturbed. Still, a deep unease settled over me. They were getting closer, and I had no idea how or when they'd strike. But they knew. They knew everything. Worst of all, I was running out of options. In the following weeks, my life turned into a nightmare. Each day brought a new accident. The heat in our house rose inexplicably, forcing me to call a technician. He said if he hadn't arrived when he did, our home would have become a ticking time bomb of carbon monoxide. It didn't add up. Then came the car trouble. The brakes failed while I was on the highway, forcing me to swerve into oncoming traffic at high speed. How did they know? How were they always one step ahead? A sinister pattern began to emerge. 3 different vehicles, a black Honda, a brown sedan, and a dark motorcycle, started tailing me regularly. They were always around, never too close, but present enough to send a clear message. They were watching, waiting for the perfect moment to act. Every encounter sent a chill down my spine. The feeling of being hunted grew stronger by the day. I found myself at a crossroads. The situation had become unbearable, and I knew Emma's life was in danger, but I couldn't drag her into this. That would have been selfish. She didn't know the full extent of what was happening, and I couldn't risk her safety. The only option was to disappear. If I wanted to eliminate any chance of being found, I'd have to vanish entirely. My life as I knew it had to end. I started planning meticulously, crafting a web of lies, forging documents, creating false trails. Every move I made felt like walking on thin ice, knowing that at any moment someone could storm into my home and force the truth out of me. All I could do was press on without looking back. This was no longer about escaping a threat. It was about surviving the nightmare I'd been thrust into. It wasn't just a matter of avoiding danger. It was about staying alive in a game where the rules were rigged against me. Nine years have passed. 9 long years of living in fear and isolation. From the beginning, my life has been about escaping, running from something that relentlessly pursued me. In the first 2 years, I never stayed in one place for more than 2 months. I kept moving, often before the dust could even settle. Money was always tight. I survived on odd jobs and temporary gigs, with low pay and grueling hours. But it wasn't the work or the lack of money that consumed me. It was the questions, the curious stares, the way people wanted to know where I was from or what was the story behind the ring I always wore around my neck. I lied with a smile, claiming it was a family heirloom, something my grandfather had given me. I could never tell the truth because the truth would condemn me. I built walls between myself and the rest of the world, knowing someone was always watching. But I could never figure out who was hunting me or why. Over the years, I tried to gather whatever evidence I could. I sought out people with influence, people who might help me understand what was happening. David Richards, a powerful politician, and Chris Monroe, a renowned journalist. Maybe their names sound familiar. But trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. I started with Richards. He seemed like the right person, someone with authority, someone who could finally give me answers. But everything went wrong from the start. When I reached out to his team on August 23rd, they initially seemed interested. Then, out of nowhere, the conversation was cut short, and 4 days later, I heard on the radio that Richards had been arrested for misconduct. It felt like the universe was mocking me. That was when I went underground again, disappearing for months. Eventually, I reached out to Monroe, desperate and clinging to hope that he could help. But when I finally located him on June 13th, all I found was a report about his sudden death from an apparent heart attack. The world seemed to close in around me. That was the last shred of hope I had. After that, I switched to survival mode. Trusting no one became my mantra. Still, a part of me dreamed of something normal, something simple, a quiet life with Faye, far from all of this. But she didn't know. She had no idea what was happening or that I had ruined our lives. And she still didn't know that I loved her more than anything. It all began to fall apart on March 6th. I knew I was being followed, but I never imagined things would escalate so quickly. I was heading to work, trying to keep my head down and stick to a routine. The plan was simple: hide out in another city and start over. Emily was with me, unaware of what was about to unfold. On my way to work, something felt off. The streets were eerily quiet, as if time itself had frozen. as if the universe had aligned for one specific purpose. I didn't want to believe it, but I felt their presence before I saw them. Two men stood across the street near an alley. The look in their eyes told me everything. I was their target. And then, chaos erupted. They charged toward me, and instinct took over. I dropped my backpack and started running. Emily, startled, stayed behind, calling out my name, but I couldn't stop. I knew that if I did, it would be the end. Their footsteps thundered behind me, their heavy breathing filling the air. There was no time to think, only to run. I darted through narrow streets, past shops and bars where people seemed oblivious to the unfolding chaos. I was a phantom, running aimlessly but with one clear goal: escape. Fear drove every step, but stopping wasn't an option. When I saw a side street to my right, I turned without hesitation, adrenaline coursing through my veins. But when I glanced back, I realized I wasn't alone. They were closing in. Desperation drove me into a small market. It was a risky move, but I had no other choice. I pushed through the glass doors, walking quickly between the aisles, trying to blend in. Emily was still outside, frozen in shock. One of the men entered behind me, distracted. He didn't see me, giving me just enough time to hide behind a stack of boxes. The second man, more cautious, lingered in the street, likely waiting for the right moment to trap me. I knew my time was running out. These men were professionals, and I was racing against the clock. What I didn't realize was that in that moment, both Emily's life and mine hung in the balance, and every decision I made could mean the difference between freedom and capture. Adrenaline surged as I crouched behind a shelf stacked with cans, trying to steady my breathing. The man's footsteps echoed closer. Every second felt like an eternity. I scanned the room and spotted the back door, a potential escape route. But the man was near, his presence suffocating. My heart pounded as I braced myself for the inevitable. Then, he entered the aisle. I froze. He was armed, his expression cold and unyielding. My pulse quickened, but I couldn't let him see my fear. He moved methodically, scanning the shelves. Sweat dripped down my face as I huddled lower, every muscle tensed. I couldn't wait any longer. In one swift motion, I bolted for the back door. Shouts erupted behind me as I burst into the alley. Emily's panicked screams filled the air, but I couldn't turn back. I knew stopping wasn't an option. Their pursuit was relentless, their boots pounding the ground behind me. The city blurred as I pushed my body to its limits, every step fueled by raw determination. Finally, I spotted a narrow side street, a sliver of hope. I veered left, the chase intensifying. The men were closer than ever, but I couldn't afford to falter. My only thought was survival, escaping to live another day.